Okay, so what is economics? Okay, now, often you hear the standard textbook definition is economics is the study of allocation of scarce resources, right? Or studying of the markets, a studying of the economy. Okay, which of all those are kind of true, they don't really fully capture the true essence of economics. So here, I'd like to present Mr. Alfred Marshall. Economics is a study of mankind in the ordinary business of life. It examined that part of individual and social action which is most closely connected with the attainment and with the use of the material requisite of well being. What is he talking about? Economics is a study of human behavior, human decisions. Right? It's trying to understand why an individual do something. What motivates them? What is their incentive? Okay. Now we do make an assumption here. We're assuming that when people do something, whatever it is that they do it because right, they want to obtain right, they want to obtain materials that's needed for their well-being, to be happy. And that is economics. Right? People do things to maximize their utility, to maximize their desires. Right? Now, why do we talk about scarce resources? Well, all resources are scarce. That is kind of true. The resources that are valuable are scarce, right? There could be plenty of resources that are not scarce. Therefore, we don't care about them because we have unlimited of those resources. So in economics, we only care about resources that are scarce. Scarcity is the limiting nature of society's resource. Right? Society have limited resources, therefore cannot produce all the goods and services people wish to have. So we reach the more textbook-like definition of economics. The study of how society manages scarce resource. Right? The way you want to think about scarce resource, right, is, for example, the most common scarce resource that everybody have, every society have, is time. Right? You have limited time. Therefore, you cannot do all the things that you want to do, and you have to make choices. Right? So for those of you right, who are using your time to watch this video or come to a lecture, right, you are trading off because whatever you are, you're watching this video now, you're not doing something else. Okay, so economics is trying to understand, right, why you are watching this video and what exactly are you giving up, and should you be watching this video? Okay, all right. So we'll talk about allocation. So resource allocation is a big part of economics. Now this is a circular flow diagram that you would have learned if you taken micro econ. Don't worry, we don't need most of it. What we want to focus on is down here in the factor market. Okay, so you're not responsible to know all the components, but I just want to use the circular flow diagram, right, to help us think about resource, right, for our purpose. Okay? So what the circular flow diagram is kind of a traditional view of economics, of the market. Okay, so everything comes from here. What I mean by everything is the things that you need to build stuff. Okay, these are the factor market. These are the factor market, input market, right, and so on. So these are the things that go in. All right, the firms are the ones that make the stuff. Right, so the firm uses the factors, and then they produce it at the product market. And then households, that's me and you, everybody, we buy things from the product market, and then we provide, right, the households, again, that's everybody, provides the resources, okay, and then so on. There's a circular here. Now, I want to focus on is down here, okay? So this is where everything comes from. Factors of production. Right? So imagine Starbucks. Right? I bought a cup of coffee from Starbucks. So you need labor. You need people to grow the beans, and you need people to roast the beans and to sell you the coffee to run the cash register. That's all labor. You need capital. You need farm equipment, and you need the cash register. You need the buildings, right? The Starbucks stores, right? And the Wi-Fi. That's all capital. These are the tools. So these are pretty straightforward, labor and capital. But what about everything else? Everything else that is required falls under the category of land. Right? Land is this all-encompassing word that we use in this model, right, to incorporate, for example, the land that is needed to grow the beans, the water that is used, right, the air that is used, the sunlight, and so on and so on. All of the resources, all natural resources that we need, right, it falls under this category, land. Now, the way you want to think about this is you say, well, wait a minute, right? This one word, right, can just is it efficient to cram all these things into land? And the reason why traditional economics view the factor market this way is the land, these natural resources doesn't really matter, right? Because we can always substitute them. I'll give you an example. Before we have electricity, right? Where do we get lights? Well, we used to harvest whale, right? We used to harvest whale for their fat, and we'll burn their fat for light. Okay, and then what happens? Well, as the economies begin to grow, there's less whales and so therefore it becomes harder to capture the whales, and the sailors have to travel much further. What happened to the price of whale fat? Well, the price of whale fat goes up, right? Whale fat becomes more expensive. Okay, so price is going to be very important here. That price sends a signal, because that as the price goes up, that means there's a scarcity. Okay, so now what did we do? What did society do? Well, we find alternatives. And so kerosene, right, which is from oil, used to be too expensive to process, right? Whale oil was cheaper and kerosene was not worth it. But now, because whale fat is becoming harder to get, right? Then it sends a signal and the market finds an alternative. So we process oil, get kerosene, and we no longer use whale fat, right? And so this gives an idea of limitless growth. Okay, now we're going to talk more about this in chapter 2, right? But the idea is, all right, as long as things are priced correctly, right, then the market will have an incentive to find an alternative. Prices are a signal. It is an extremely important role. Okay? Prices offer a signal, right? And what do prices represent? Prices represent the values of things have. Now, when we say value, quote unquote value. Now, we're going to talk about values a little bit more later on, because we're defining values in a little bit differently than how normal people or people might use it, right? So what we mean by value is how much people are willing to pay. And here is the problem. Here's where the break in this model is. If people are not willing to pay for something, then in this model, in the market, it will have no value. Okay? If it have no value, then it will not have a price, right? And therefore, right, it will be overconsumed. It will be destroyed. Okay? Let me give you an example of what we're talking about here. This is the Yasuni National Park, okay, in Ecuador, right? It's one of the most biodiverse rainforests in the world. Okay, and what happened? Well, back in 2010, oil was discovered underneath this rainforest. Okay, now Ecuador, they're a developing country, right? People there are relatively poor, and so, all right, so the Ecuadorian president, right, want to lift his people out of poverty, but they also want to preserve this rainforest. So, what did he do? He went to the UN. And he made a proposal. He says, look, we have oil, right? We don't want to dig it up. We want to keep the rainforest. Okay. So how about this? And he's speaking to the international community, right? So we're talking European countries, North American countries, and so on. And he says, how about you guys pay us, right? You guys care about the rainforest too. So how about you guys pay us the amount of money that we would have gotten from the oil, and then we'll leave the rainforest alone. Okay. Now, what do you think happened? Well, as it turns out, the world kind of just says, they refuse to pay. Okay. And the story, right? And then this is the story that we kind of expect, right? Oil production have begun in 2016, right? And they've begun drilling. Now, what happened? Right? Did the rainforest not have value? Well, of course it does, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it, right? We all value the rainforest, right? Every one of us, right? Every country, right? Norwegians value, right? The Norwegians, the Germans, right? And Americans, right? We all value the rainforest. Why didn't we pay for it, right? So there's no willingness to pay. Now, we can unpack this. We're not going to do it now, right? But there's many different reasons. But my point is, there's no price, okay? And if there's no price, right, then there's no value, right, in the sense here. Okay, and then so things will be overconsumed and things will be destroyed. All right. Okay, and that's gonna be one of our main goal, right, for environmental economics is to how do we incorporate, how do we put a price on these things? How do we price these things so that it will have a value, right? And so on.